Thank you, Keith. The Brown County woman charged in a hidden camera case will not face a jury of her peers this week.
38-year-old Samantha Treblecock's criminal trial has been removed from the court schedule and replaced now with a motion hearing.
She was accused of enticing a teenage victim to her then boyfriend's home in the town of Lawrence, where the underage victim was secretly recorded while undressed in October of 2021. Treblecock faces 4 felony charges.
As we first reported earlier this month, her boyfriend at the time of the alleged crime, Michael Cannell, recently pleaded out in federal court. Our cameras were rolling when Cannell walked out of the federal courtroom, sentenced to 5 years in prison with 5 years extended supervision. Prosecutors say he produced multiple secret recordings of a minor girl while naked in his home bathroom using a hidden camera. In a First Alert update, Brittany Schmidt tells us why Treblecock's trial has been taken off the court docket.
While out on a $20,000 cash bond, Samantha Treblecock walked into her final pre-trial hearing Monday.
The case is scheduled for trial on Wednesday, Your Honor. It's not resolved.
Her defense attorney filed 2 motions just last week. The first, a 130-plus page motion where the defense alleges 9 significant constitutional issues regarding 2 search warrants in the case. The second, a motion to suppress evidence extracted from a phone that the defense says they never entirely received from the prosecution.
Ultimately, the 50,000 was pared down to 25,000 pages of Cellubrite extractions. There's evidence in there of conversations between my client and the alleged victim's mother regarding this entire incident. So we feel that we should be entitled to that.
And Your Honor, I'm not suggesting they're not entitled to it, but when that evidence is commingled with contraband, it can be viewed in a secure setting. But I am not going to just release that.
The defense argues it's not contraband because of a plea deal reached by Treblecock's co-defendant Michael Cannell. During his sentencing weeks ago in federal court, documents revealed concern among recent appellate court decisions regarding photos, like the ones Cannell took of the underage victim undressed, and whether the recordings of the victim in this case constituted sexually explicit conduct.
The only evidence that isn't viewable is the alleged child pornography. Okay, I have a transcript from Judge Griesbach at Mr. Cannell's sentencing in federal court that says that this is not child pornography.
Brown County Judge Timothy Hinkfist questions the timing of the defense's motions, considering he denied the defense's motion to take up a different trial this week.
I wrote a letter back to you saying, no, we're taking this case first because there's a lot of interest in it and there's victims involved, etc. And then next thing you know, I got 100 and some page motion. It almost seemed like a payback. I don't know, but it did to me.
Judge Hinkfist decided to remove the trial from the docket and schedule a motion hearing for April of 2024. The judge made it clear any and all motions need to be filed by that date. In Brown County, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.